So it is my great pleasure to introduce Richard Reyes-Gavilan, the Executive Director of the DC Public Library for today's keynote address. He has previously worked for almost 20 years at both the New York and Brooklyn Public Libraries and appointed the Executive Director of the DCPL in 2014. He was lured to Washington, D.C. primarily to oversee the $211 million modernization of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library, the city's only building designed by the legendary architect Mies van der Rohe. The library is expected to serve as an inspirational destination for innovation, civic empowerment, and delight. Mr. Reyes-Gavilan is also aggressively building and renovating neighborhood libraries all over the DC area. 2 new libraries in the West End and Cleveland Park neighborhoods were awarded the American Institute of Architects DC Chapter Design and Urban Catalyst Awards, respectively. Mr. Reyes-Gavilan holds a bachelor's degree in English from the State University of New York at Albany, where he was recently recognized with the 2019 Excellence in Public Service Award, and a master's degree in Library and Information Science from the University of Texas at Austin. His talk for today is entitled "What's in a Name? Rebuilding a Library Named After Martin Luther King Jr." So without further ado, please join me welcoming Mr. Richard Reyes-Gavilan.
Hi, thank you, Suyun, and good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. I've got to say, I'm usually very comfortable speaking in front of large groups of people, but there's nothing more terrifying than speaking to large groups of people when you cannot see their faces or gauge their feedback. Are they bored? Are they asleep? Are they excited? So bear with me as I go through this talk today. I do hope that you'll find it interesting, and I look forward to hopefully interacting with you a little bit at the end of my presentation. So in a minute, I will share my screen, and I've got a pretty long, colorful deck to go through with you. Just again, by way of introduction, I am Richard Reyes-Gavilan. I'm the director of the DC Public Library System. I've been here now almost 7 years. I think this is the second time I've spoken at the Catholic Symposium, and it is always an honor to be here. I've got to say, Suyun, when you reached out to me back in October to ask if I would participate, I was really thrilled because not only had we just finished this Herculean 6-year project, the MLK Junior Library, but there was so much going on in my brain around this concept of naming and memorials. And Dean Smith alluded to that in his opening remarks, that you're thinking about how things are named and whether they should be named and what's really in a name. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. It's going to be partially, it's just going to be a design tour of the new MLK Library. And for those of you who are familiar with that building, and I assume that's many of you, you'll be really surprised at what you see. And then again, part of my talk is going to be just sort of an exploration on the nature of memorials and what do we do to honor people who deserve honors, like Martin Luther King Jr., and how does that influence the library's program, and should it? And I absolutely argue that it does, and certainly in a time where we are rethinking names and what they mean, this is just a perfect time to address this topic. So without further ado, I will share my screen. Suyun, if you can tell me. Oh wait, it says host has disabled participant screen sharing, so I need I need a little help.
Okay. Should be okay now.
Okay, can you see my introductory slide?
Yes.
Excellent. There is my contact information if anybody wants to get in touch with me offline. I'll keep this up for just a second. Again, nothing for me has been more professionally fulfilling than working on this project. I was happily living in New York City for most of my adult life, and actually most of my life. But the opportunity to work on this transformative project with a budget of over $200 million, I knew, frankly, that I would never have an opportunity to work on something so profound again in my life. And so my wife and 2 young daughters came to DC, and it's just been an incredibly humbling experience, frankly, working on this. And the fact that we were able to finish the project during COVID, and the project has come in slightly under budget. I'm just really proud of the work of everyone involved. So let's go into this, and let's see. Can I move my slides? Great. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are having a real reckoning with memorials, not only in DC but across the country and across the world. I think that for many decades, people hadn't given a whole lot of thought to the names on buildings, the statues, what they represent, but certainly the reckoning that has occurred, especially with the Confederate monuments in Virginia and the South, really have, I think, placed a new importance on memorials. Here in the district, the lower left, you'll see Woodrow Wilson High School. My oldest daughter is a freshman at Woodrow Wilson. This is a school that will be changing its name very soon. Frankly, Woodrow Wilson was a pretty virulent racist, even for his time. And the district has really decided that this man does not represent, the district's values, and students shouldn't be learning in a building that is named after him. So lots of thought going through people's minds, or again, around the country on the value of naming. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we've got the MLK Library on the lower right. Now, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. You've got a building that's was named after a Black man in 1971, and this is in a city filled with monuments named after primarily white men, many of whom were slave owners. So thinking through what importance that has symbolically was something that really challenged us throughout the entire design process for the building, as well as the development of the program. I should say, for those of you who don't know, the building, we opened it in September, but because of COVID restrictions, we are only allowing people to come in for the most part to pick up books that they've put on hold, or depending on the level of restrictions, possibly you can get on a computer. But the vast amount of the building's 440,000 square feet remains off limits, unfortunately. But we hope that with improving COVID numbers, we will soon be able to open the whole building. And you will see throughout the morning why it's going to be so important for us to open the whole building. This is a photograph of the DC Public Library Board of Trustees meeting in 1971. This actually took place in the Chevy Chase neighborhood library. And what you see happening here are board members voting on naming the new central library in downtown DC. At this point, the MLK Library was not the MLK Library. It was basically the new central library. It was under construction. And there was a 3-2 vote to name the building after MLK Jr. As you might imagine, there were 3 African-American board members. They voted to name the building after MLK. The 2 white board members had advocated to name a room in the new building after MLK. And the majority of the board got what they wanted, and lo and behold, We had the first memorial in Washington, D.C. named after MLK Jr. and continues to be, frankly, one of the largest in the country by virtue of its size. Another important consideration when you think back to 1970 or 1971, when the building was named after MLK, the population in Washington, D.C. in 1970 was 71% Black. That's 3 out of every 4 individuals living in Washington, D.C. was Black. So to have a central library, this beautiful new building named after MLK, was profoundly important. I mean, just an incredible shot in the arm that really underscored the the importance of this individual to not only to civil rights across the country and world, but really to DC. And I'm going to talk a little bit more later on about Dr. King's importance to DC specifically, and how that is a much more that resonated with us much more than Dr. King as a national or global figure. We really wanted to sort of peel back some layers and talk about how King influenced the growth of this city, and we'll chat about that a little bit more. Of course, on the other side of this this slide, we've got the Black population of Washington, D.C. in 2015, when we were getting ready to close the library for its major renovation. And you'll see that the population now was less than 50% Black. And that, of course, triggers conversations around displacement and gentrification. And certainly during the amazing amount of community engagement and outreach that we did throughout the design process, the one thing that we heard over and over and over again was a reminder that this library belongs to Washington, D.C., and it really belonged to the Black community that struggled to get it named after Dr. King. And we were warned all the time, you know, don't make this library into something that it's not, and don't make this library something that is just for newcomers to Washington, D.C. or tourists to Washington, D.C. Really consider that this is the most important monument in the city that is built exclusively for district residents. This is not a Smithsonian museum. It is not a memorial. It is not part of the federal city. It is really something that is a source of pride for local DC residents, and that is something that we had to factor throughout the entirety of the design process. So let's go in and talk a little bit about the planning for the new library. The Urban Land Institute, I'm sure many of you are aware of this organization. They wrote a really interesting report in 2011. There was a lot of chatter in the early 2000s about possibly closing the MLK Library forever and rebuilding it as part of a new development called City Center, which grew up just north of where the library sits. And one of the there were a few important events and decisions that ultimately, I think, saved the MLK Library. One of which was it was given landmark status in 2007. Also this ULI report, which, and I just put a quotation in here, where the ULI writers talked about the building being an iconic architectural masterpiece and essential center of community activity for the citizens of the district. However, years of neglect have made or left the building in dire need of rehabilitation and renewal. And that really was an understatement. The building was miserable. And I've got a few before pictures that I'll show you, but I won't harp on it. But this Urban Land Institute report, I think, was something that really helped people think about the building in a new way, that there was a possibility to save it and improve it for the next generation of library users. This is a slide that, you know, I share all the time when I talk about this project and this building. You know, you've got, despite the fact that the building in some ways was not loved and had many functional issues, the fact that you had 2 of the 20th century's most towering figures involved intimately with the building, I think speaks to this desire to really help us think about how to improve it for generations to come. So as I mentioned, the building was the first memorial to Dr. King dedicated following his assassination. And then the building, of course, was also the one of the final buildings that was designed by Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe, of course, one of the probably 3 or so most important architects of the 20th century. The MLK Library was Mies's only library that was ever built. He designed a few more that were not built, but the MLK Library was his only realized library in the world, and it is his only building at all in Washington, D.C. So for that reason alone, there was a lot of support for keeping the building and not redeveloping it, not tearing it down, or altering it in a significant way. And while my talk does not focus on historic rehabilitation or renovation, that was a very, very important part of the renovation process, was making sure that this building kept its landmark status, and that this Mies building remained a Mies building, and it wasn't altered to the point of being unrecognizable. Community engagement was a monstrous part of the design. So important in any project to get community buy-in around the changes that you're making. This holds true for a branch library that might be 20,000 square feet, and certainly holds true for a building that is 400,000 square feet. So we spent many nights out in neighborhoods across Washington, D.C. at community meetings, large plenary meetings at the MLK Library. We held focus groups. We did a lot of online crowdsourcing, design charrettes, roundtables around what should this new library look like. And it was an effort that was very, very arduous, but ultimately paid great dividends for a whole host of reasons. I think that there were elements of the new building that I probably wouldn't have advocated for had it not been advocated so strongly by community members. And there's a little one icon in the middle there, a legacy of Mies and King. There is a phenomenal hour-long documentary that was funded by a Dutch Dutch cultural organization. It follows the design process of the library, specifically focusing in on our lead architect, Francine Hubin from Meccano. It's a really interesting documentary. It is now freely available. If you go to YouTube and you type in Legacy of Mies and King and you want to learn more about this project, by all means do so. And you'll see a lot of the community meetings taking place and a lot of interviews with me, staff, residents of the district. So I do recommend that you check that out as you have time. We also put together this really terrific advisory panel, 18 community members who had maybe who were larger stakeholders in the project. Most of them were from downtown, like the head of the Downtown Business Improvement District, the head of the First Congregational Church next door to the library. Again, people in the community that had very prominent roles downtown that served as a sounding board throughout the entire project. And again, as those of you who will go on to oversee your own projects, having advisory panels that support getting buy-in for your ideas, who are there to tell you when you have a bad idea. I couldn't be happier than having established this advisory panel that really was instrumentally helpful to the project. Here are a couple of snapshots of some of the community engagement sessions that we had at the library, as well as just some of the struggles that people had with the old building. These are some of the actual quotations that we captured. People complaining about getting lost in the stairways and hallways, I love the quotation on the lower left. The lower level is one of the more depressing floors I've ever been in anywhere. People talked about the need for an auditorium, and we certainly fulfilled that. And here's a conversation I had with a resident who, one of the many people who who was there to remind me that this building has a history, and don't you dare forget what that history was and what this building means to many people who have been in this city for many decades. So after all the design charrettes and all the community feedback was aggregated, we put together these 4 building program tenets, balancing the joy of reading with a space for innovation, showcasing the life and legacy of Martin Luther King, respecting the historic designation and the work of Mies, and then creating a space that is bright, open, flexible, and warning. 4 very, very important tenets. And just because I'm talking today about what's in a name, I will say that the thing that surprised me the most as a newcomer to Washington, D.C., at all of the design and community engagement sessions that I attended and led, was just this steady drumbeat of, hey, library, you've got to do a better job of honoring Dr. King. Putting his name outside of the library or putting a mural in the Great Hall does not mean that you're really showcasing his life. It doesn't mean that you're honoring his legacy. And that is something that we really took to heart, and something that I think that we have done a really good job in this new building. So let's get in and see some pretty pictures. This is not one of them, but I do like to hang on this picture for a minute, because I think that this is really representative of everything that was wrong with the old MLK library. This is an actual photograph of the public stairs. This is not the private, these are not the egress stairs, these are not the fire stairs. These are the public stairs at the old MLK library. Dark, oppressive, dispiriting, dull. Indeed, they were scary at times. And basically, there's just no reason when you would come into that old library building for you to stay, explore, do all the things that new libraries make you want to do, right? New libraries make you want to stay and enjoy a cup of coffee, learn with your neighbors, meet new people. This old building really had one function, which was to go in, get what you needed, and get out as fast as humanly possible. Certainly not a central library for the next century, but this is what we were dealt with. And this buff yellow brick, I have to say, really dominated every single floor of the building, and it really just provided a monotony, a relentless monotony that was hard to deal with. We did keep a lot of the yellow brick. Again, I just want to remind everyone that the building is historic, but we were able to remove a ton of the yellow brick to make the building more open, friendlier, livelier, more full of joy. And we'll see that as we start sharing some of the prettier after images. Here's just another example of those dark, dreary staircases. And let's move on to the good stuff. A really important aspect of designing the building that we wanted was to come up with an approach to how members of the public would understand the building. This is a sort of a crude legibility diagram that we developed and shared with our architect, how we wanted people to understand the building. So just to give you some context, again, the building is about 400,000 square feet. There are 4 main floors. Each main floor is about 65,000 square feet. And the way we have now developed the new building is that the quieter parts of the program, or more of the passive, private parts of the program, are on the east side of the building, which is adjacent to a church. And then the building gets more active as you go to the west side of the building or to the 9th Street side of the building. And that approach exists on every single floor of the building. And what you're seeing in the middle is that on every floor of the building, for those of you who are familiar with the Great Hall is that space that's about 11,000 square feet as soon as you enter the building. Every floor has really a Great Hall size space. And we wanted to make sure that every floor of the building had some semblance of community or assembly on every single floor. And so that was a really important component to the new building. Whether you're on the 2nd floor, 3rd floor, 4th floor, 5th floor, that central part of the building is going to be an active part of the building for people to just get together. It can be loud, it can be quiet, but it's really going to be about spaces that encourage people to get together in groups. And I'll give you just an example of how this works in practicality. Let me just use, I can use a pointer. Cool. So this is the 2nd floor of the new MLK library. This over here is the east side of the building. So this is what I would call part of the passive program. What we've got here is the Adult Learning Center and the Center for Accessibility. These are 2 public programs that are very important to what we do at the library, but certainly require, in some cases, more privacy than other parts of the program. So we've got this quiet, more passive program here, again, our Center for Adult Learning. Here is that community assembly space, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. This is a really, really great innovative part of the new library called our community services area, where we will actually have district government agencies delivering work and products to residents in our fantastic new building. And then we get to the very active side of the building, which is our new children's room. So every floor has something akin to this: a quiet, passive program, something really exciting happening in the middle, and then something very exciting happening on the eastern side of the building along 9th Street. All right, let's get into some of the actual photographs. And I should say that in some cases, I will have photographs. In some cases, I will still be using renderings. The reason we don't have great photographs for all of our new spaces is we simply haven't done the shooting yet. We haven't had great professional photographs taken of all the interior spaces. That is largely due to COVID. We are still doing some exhibition installation. There is still some interior work happening. And once that's done, we will have all our pretty professional photographs. But that is why in some cases I will still be using renderings when I will be addressing parts of the building. So very little is more important to a building than how you are greeted when you walk into it. A very, very important component of this new building. If you remember the old building, when you would look to your left and your right here, you would see that awful yellow brick, and it would basically obscure any knowledge of how to get around the building. And so one of the important things that we had to do, especially as we negotiated with the various regulatory agencies that control historic renovation in the city, is that we got permission to remove a lot of the yellow brick in the entry, exposing these beautiful new staircases that really invite people up through the building to explore what our lead architect called the journey of learning. So that was really a fundamentally crucial part of this renovation, was having people walk into the building and getting just a simple sense of excitement, because the old building frankly offered zero excitement once you walked into its doors. And we needed to change that immediately upon walking in. So this is not a rendering or a space age cartoon. This is actual photograph of one of our 2 new monumental stairs. So you can see a pretty significant difference between those dark, dingy stairs I showed you a few minutes ago and these really just incredibly exciting, uplifting staircases that really draw people up through the building. You'll also notice that they've got these sort of strange asymmetrical, trapezoidal, circular shapes. This was a very intentional design component introduced by our architects. They wanted to make sure that every new part of the building was going to have some sort of curve and asymmetry to it, so that it could be very easily differentiated from what was the original linear Miesian design. So anywhere you see just like these strange asymmetrical curves, you will know that that is new building. Anywhere that you see those rigid 90-degree angles, you'll know that that is the original Mies building. So the staircases, probably the most fundamental, important part of the new design. We really needed something to bring people up. This is the same staircase, but now looking up, you've got these three beautiful skylights. Each of these circles are 5 feet in diameter, and they really flood the stairwells with natural light. Even when it's not sunny out, the journey up into the building is really just beautiful. And again, what this means for vertical circulation, what this means for bringing people, inviting people not only to come to the library, but to love the library and explore everything that we have within, a really, really important, an important element of the design. And frankly, I argue when people talk about how are you going to honor Dr. King, you know, I say there are two ways to honor Dr. King. You can honor Dr. King programmatically, right, with what the library does with the residents every single day, but you can also honor Dr. King architecturally. And I think that, you know, a staircase like this that is so full of hope and so full of promise and so full of optimism, I think this sort of embodies Dr. King's teachings and philosophy in an architectural way. So I do argue that Dr. King not only inspired what we're going to do in the library, but the building's design itself. As a side note, the library has recently rebranded. DCPL has rebranded, and our new mark is inspired by our new staircase. So you can see that these three sort of interlocking trapezoids are inspired by the library's new staircase, and it is really meant to convey the spirit of exploration, of ascension, and of learning. So let's move back for a moment to the bad old days. And I wanted to show you a picture of something that we had to grapple with. These corridors, these hallways in the old MLK library on the upper floors. What you're seeing now is, if you look on the lower left and you see those red dotted lines, we are in between those red dotted lines in these photographs. And so we needed to, thankfully, these gray brick walls were not structural, so we could get rid of a lot of them in order to expose a much greater part of the interior of every single floor. So the interior red lines, we were able to eliminate, creating that great community assembly space that I talked to you about when I showed the design approach to the building. And let me show you a couple, and let me show you how we changed that. Here is, well, the left is a rendering and the right is a photograph. Remember those, that yellow brick wall? That yellow brick wall has been replaced by just a marker, the gray stripes on the floor. That is a signifier of where those gray, where that brick wall used to be. We put in that that stripe as a nod to the old building, and that was something that was very pleasing to the regulatory bodies that controlled the historic renovation. They liked it whenever we changed something, but we would introduce an element that would remind people that something else used to be there. However, the important thing for the purposes of this conversation are the fact that we exposed the building in ways that we could never have in the past. Now whenever when you go to any of the upper floors of the building, you can see north and south, left and right, and it is a real dramatic change to the experience that you used to have in the old library. Let me now move on. One of the things that that people talked about during the design phase, and I like to credit our former mayor, Tony Williams, who liked to talk to me about the fact that the building really needed a new reading room. He said, there's no place in the MLK library that somebody wants to go read. And we took his criticism to heart, and we decided to carve a 2,000 square foot hole between the 3rd and 5th floor to create this new dramatic double height reading room. The artwork on the ceiling is created by an artist by the name of Zenobia Bailey. She has done work all over the country. I love that this is a dreamscape inspired by Dr. King. You can't see it from this picture, but that sort of blue and purple background is actually a photograph of protesters at the March on Washington, taken from one of the library's historical photographs. But it creates just a dynamic, beautiful reading space for people who will be coming in with their laptops or their books, or just looking to sit in a space that's really, really dreamlike. I've got to say, I don't think that there's a better word for it. Here's another photograph of the same space, but from the 4th floor, our new special collections area. And I just wanted to show another example of Zenobia's work. This is this beautiful mosaic that is at the new Hudson Yards subway station in New York City. So Zenobia's work is here, introducing people to the new Hudson Yards development in New York. And you'll see some of the similar elements in this mosaic as you saw in the ceiling that she designed for MLK. Moving up further still, we've got a photo of our new auditorium. It was so important for us to create destination locations deep within the building. We've had some people who argued that our auditorium should be on the lower level, but we wanted something to draw people up to explore the upper floors of the building. And frankly, from an architectural perspective, by having the auditorium on the upper floors, we could have it without having any columns that would create any sort of visual barriers to the stage. So we've got this beautiful new auditorium. Notice again that you'll see mostly curves. You don't see any hard angles or right angles. All you see are these curved wooden spaces to indicate this is new work done by our Dutch architects. Beautiful, beautiful auditorium that we can't wait to start programming. And finally, the ultimate destination in the building, this 20,000 square foot reading garden. Again, you've got curves, you've got just a dynamic, peaceful place to come sit and read. And as we get into COVID recovery, we anticipate that we'll be doing a lot of fresh air programming out here as well. Really important to give people that sense of safety. And we love nothing more than having an opportunity to do outdoor programming. And just to give you a sense of how these pieces fit together, you see that notion of the design approach even exists on the 5th floor. You've got a quiet garden on the left side of the building. That is just a standard green roof that is not accessible by the public. In the middle, you've got that space for assembly and community. That's the 300 seat auditorium. And then as you move to the right, you see this, this is our new event space. And then these glass doors, and actually these doors too, these retract so that this event space and the reading garden can be unified into one beautiful space that we will use for programming. And frankly, we also will we will generate some revenue for the library too by doing rentals. This is the old library. This is a picture that I took not long before we moved out of the building in 2016 or 17. And then this is a photograph of the new building. So you see a very dramatic difference between the old and the new. So that is, I'm gonna pause on the pretty pictures momentarily, and then I'm going to now spend the rest of my time just talking a little bit more about the program itself, what we're going to be doing in the library, and how our thinking around Dr. King helped inform some of the what we call the 5 experiences at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. I think I'm okay on time. It's about 9:55, so I probably have maybe 10 more minutes, and then we can open it up to questions. So, you know, some people might argue that these aren't experiences, but they're sort of the 5 things that we talked about as we developed the program. What are the things that we want to focus on? And absolutely, they are, you know, influenced by Dr. King, very much starting with this idea of, you know, creating spaces to create jobs and freedom, and you can interpret freedom to mean independence and dignity, and we'll talk a little bit about that as I talk about some of the things that we're doing. Opportunities for civic engagement, I've chatted a little bit about that already with our auditorium and our community services space. Another experience, of course, let's not forget that we've got a library full of hundreds of thousands of books. We wanted to create spaces to foster a love of reading. We also wanted to create a space that would foster cultural production. With all the self-employed artists and authors and creators in the district, how can this library be a space for them? And then finally, how is the MLK Library really embody Dr. King's vision, and how is this a space for social and racial justice? So let's get into each of these 5 experiences that I'll just talk about for a minute or two, and then we will close. So the notion of jobs and freedom, we've got a few spaces in the building, and let's start with freedom. Earlier in the presentation, I showed you on the 2nd floor, we've got a new Center for Adult Learning that is adjacent to our new Center for Accessibility. Adult learning, of course, those of you who know and work in libraries, this is a space where our staff work with new readers of English. So these are adults who are learning English for the first time. We also include people who are sort of becoming digital citizens for the first time. These adult learning spaces require special equipment, special classrooms, specially trained staff. The old MLK Library had this space wide open on the 2nd floor of the old building. Now it's in purpose-built space that is, again, it requires a little bit of privacy, so we have it on the eastern side of the building. Similar, our new Center for Accessibility, which for those of you who don't know, DC Public Library is also the state library for DC. So our Center for Accessibility serves as our library for the blind and physically handicapped. And again, we've got our specialized team of staff doing work with residents with disabilities. Such important work as we create spaces for independence, and we give residents the dignity and the learning that they deserve from the library. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the library's creative labs. That's everything from our new tool library to our fabrication studio to our dance studio, but giving self-employed people, entrepreneurs, spaces that they can create in was really, really important. Also, this notion of creating more co-working spaces. You know, we designed this before COVID, but we know that people are going to be coming to MLK Library, provided that it's safe, as a third space. People who may no longer be going to a traditional office will be looking to an MLK Library for spaces to work. And I'll talk about the cafe in a second. This is just one example of a co-working space. These really beautiful, air-conditioned, acoustically private meeting rooms are just terrific. You can go in here with your team and spend all day quite comfortably without much problem. The cafe is a very important part of the library. We wanted the cafe to also embody the spirit of Dr. King. So we are working with DC Central Kitchen and Jose Andres to operate the new library cafe. It's called Marianne's by DC Central Kitchen. And really the most important part of this cafe is that it's a workforce development opportunity for all the residents who will be working here. Every single resident, every single employee of the cafe is going to be led through additional workforce development programs to help them get a leg up in the hospitality industry or in other areas of the workforce. So, you know, this is not going to be a dead-end job for people who are coming in who may not be making a great salary here. The cafe really is just a stepping stone for expanding their careers, and we want that expansion to take place in partnership with the library. So we could not be happier than this partnership that we've got with DC Central Kitchen and Think Food Group. Jose Andres, as many of you know, great philanthropist, also very, very dedicated to the mission of DC Central Kitchen. And so we're looking forward to opening the cafe as soon as we are allowed to open, as soon as we're allowed to allow more people into the library building. The notion of civic engagement, I mentioned this very briefly at the outset, but we've got this great space on the second floor, this 11,000 square foot community services space. Those of you who work in public libraries know that you know, we are great partners with with other government agencies, with not-for-profits that are always coming to libraries looking for space, whether it's for helping residents with tax aid, whether it's for job placement, whether it's signing up for healthcare. Well, we had the foresight to design spaces with these groups in mind, and organizations like the DC Office of Employment Services will be able to actually take long-term residents in some of these meeting rooms, working directly with the public for 3 months, 6 month, 9 month engagements. So we're going to have this whole space here on the second floor filled with maybe 6, 7, 8, or 9 different government agencies or not-for-profits at any one time. People will be visiting the library to get their passport, get job placement, sign up for healthcare, possibly renew their driver's license. It becomes a sort of marketplace for city services and will obviously drive traffic to the library for people who may not have been thinking about coming to the library to begin with. So it's a really good kind of symbiotic relationship. Here is a rendering of something that is coming soon. It is not yet built, but this is one of our other co-working spaces that we call the living room. We wanted to give residents maximum flexibility with ways in which to work with their friends or colleagues. So this cool space is going to be on the 3rd floor, sandwiched in between some of our more traditional study and meeting rooms. And then as we continue to think about civic engagement, I don't have great photographs, but we do have now a new conference center that's got a total of 6 rooms adjacent to the 4th floor entrance to our auditorium. These 6 rooms that can be booked by the public, each can sit maybe 40 or 50 people. They're 600 to 750 square feet. Great, great space for affinity groups, cultural organizations, meetings to take place. And this is also going to be a space that will be buzzing with activity, frankly, every single hour that we are open. Moving quickly to the idea of cultural production, we wanted to create spaces like this space in the Great Hall that will give residents an opportunity to not only create art, but to showcase their art. This not only includes like the sort of makeshift dance space, but spaces like our new studio lab. This is employee Ryan Williams and myself doing a podcast maybe about 4 months ago in our new studio lab. So we've got lots of spaces for the creative community to come do podcasting, music recording, digital archiving, building, dancing. There's so much going on for the creative community, so important to this concept of cultural production. Moving on, this idea of cultivating a love of reading. I've mentioned it a couple of times. There was nothing in the old library that made people want to come in and stay for a long period of time and say, you know what, I love reading, I love this space. And so we wanted to create lots and lots of good areas for people to just come in and enjoy. And you know, one of the things that gave me the most heartburn when I first moved to DC in 2014 with 2 young daughters, our children's room was like the most depressing space really in the entire district. I would take my kids, and you know, our staff was so great, but they were really handcuffed by a program room that was surrounded by buff yellow brick. You know, there was no joy, no delight in any of our rooms, let alone our room that should have been the most joyful, our children's room. So we've rectified that. And I think that this children's slide that goes down from the children's room down towards the first floor is really emblematic of this focus on joy and delight. Here are a couple of pictures of our new children's room. Notice that we've dropped the ceiling somewhat artificially by introducing these new light fixtures that gives the space a little bit more intimacy. There's also a lot of great color. And I know something that parents will also appreciate is that we've actually created adult seating in addition to having children's seating. Too often you go to a children's room in a library and parents have to force themselves to sit in chairs that are designed for 4-year-olds. But if you look along the left, you've got adult seating. So you've got caregivers, parents, nannies that can sit and watch their children read and can spend long periods of time in the children's room. This is a picture of the little amphitheater that we've also got in the children's room. A great colorful space right on the corner of 9th and G for kids to come play. This is where we'll do our story time programming. Just again, really, really, really delightful. I mean, there's just no better word to describe it. Moving forward, again, I won't harp on the reading room, but this is another picture of that Zenobia Bailey reading room. This is one of the mobiles that hangs in the void between the 3rd and 5th floor. I should say that Zenobia hand designs these mobiles. It's basically metalwork that she does that's really just very, very cool looking. And you can look at it up close when you come visit us at the library. The new cafe will have an outdoor seating space on the ground floor. This beautiful new space replaces an exit ramp. This actually was an exit ramp from our garage out onto 9th Street. We have altered the ramp. We've actually removed the ramp, and now we've got additional outdoor seating. Again, great, especially during COVID response. Lastly, I'm going to just hang on this 5th element of the library's 5 experiences, this concept of social and racial justice, talking a little bit about the People's Archive, which is all of the library's special collections, Washingtoniana, Black Studies, and even the Peabody room that we have at our Georgetown library, our robust new exhibition program, and then focusing in on King in DC as opposed to King as a national and global civil rights figure. So here are a couple of renderings of some of the new exhibition space that's coming to the library. This is not there yet. We have had some COVID-related delays to the exhibition program, but I do think that this will be in place before our next grand reopening that will be taking place hopefully later this spring. I mentioned that it is really important for us to talk about Dr. King in DC. So much so that a couple of years ago, we even had a program dedicated to what is Dr. King's impact on the district, unlike any impact that he may have nationally. For those of you who don't know, Dr. King was a really, really strong advocate, for example, of DC home rule. So there's so much that that Dr. King influenced in the life of residents in the district. And we want to capture that as we honor him. We don't necessarily want to fall back on, you know, things like Dr. King and his "I Have a Dream" speech. You know, we really want to talk about Dr. King as a local civil rights figure, not just a national one. And I think that is an important distinction to be made. Here is this really neat video graphic that is displayed on the window of our cafe. Here's Dr. King. This is coming from the Library Special Collections. We use a great video artist named Robin Bell. Some of you may know him. He has done some video work for us at the MLK Library already. I won't talk too much about some of the other things, but when you walk into the library, instead of seeing buff yellow brick on either side, you will see glass, and this glass has an artistic treatment by an artist named Nikisha Durrett. Nikisha takes this image of Dr. King speaking at Cardozo High School here in the district, and she juxtaposes it with the other side of the entrance to the library. You can't see this great in photographs, but this is Cardozo High School, a much more recent photograph of Cardozo High School with children in their Black Lives Matter sweatshirts, and they are at a protest last year. And if you look very closely at either of these artistic treatments, you will see that they are made up of little protest signs and buttons. Some of these buttons are part of the library special collections, and some of these buttons were actually designed by students at Cardozo High School. So a lot of complexity and a lot of interest and intrigue in the art that is in the vestibule. Also very important to see that we did not want to obscure our beautiful new staircase. So we made it so that you could actually see through the art very, very easily. Moving on, and it's 10:10, so I'm going to wrap up. We have Alma Thomas, who some of you know is really one of the most important painters that ever has come out of DC. The library was gifted 13 Alma Thomas paintings at the end of last year. Some of those will be on display, and Alma Thomas will be central to some of the teachings that we do. She herself was a junior high school art teacher for many years at Shaw Junior High School, but a really important figure in terms of the Washington Color School movement from the 70s and 80s and 60s, I should say. And the fact that she was a African-American woman, painting in a largely white male world says a lot about how important she was to the district. Here are a couple of examples of Alma's work. And then I'll just close showing a couple of images of some of the upcoming exhibitions that we're going to be having. All of these exhibitions really focus on this idea of advocacy, finding your voice, protest, revolution. You know, in DC, we can't vote we have no representation in Congress, but we can protest. And I think that's something that we want to really double down on as we do a lot of our programming, especially with teens and kids. Here's another image of a upcoming exhibition on representation, or specifically no taxation without representation. This is an exhibition on DC statehood that we're developing. Here are a couple of images. Marion Barry, the mayor for life. We've got some exhibitions coming up on him and his importance as a outsized figure in DC history. And then some of the local DC creative movements, punk rock. That is a photograph of Minor Threat playing a concert, I believe, in the early 80s. And then on the right, we are going to be doing a lot as part of our commitment to the DC Go-Go archive. That is a photograph of the Metro DCPS that became the epicenter of the Don't Mute DC movement from a couple of summers ago. Finally, this is my last slide. Here are a couple of panels that were created and hung outside of the US Chamber of Commerce building during the Black Lives Matter protests from last summer that happened after the murder of George Floyd. We worked with the Smithsonian and the US Chamber of Commerce to acquire some of this art that will become part of our special collections. And as always, we will program heavily around it. I won't focus too much on this, but I won't end before talking about the fact that while we have these 5 experiences, we do want to foster equity in every single experience that we provide at the library, including making sure that everything we do at MLK connects to neighborhoods. It has some component of reaching out to the most vulnerable populations, which include our homeless residents, our residents who speak languages other than English, and residents who frankly require us to remove all barriers to participation. And that is something that infuses everything that we do in the library. And I will end here. Thank you all for participating. If in fact you stayed with me, I can't tell because I can't see you. But thanks, thanks again for being here.
Thank you. For questions, please use the chat box. It's really nice to see the beautiful building and the lineup of nice programs, and hopefully we can visit the library physically soon.
Maybe the next symposium we can do there.
We can do a tour maybe.
Great, love it.
So I think some questions and comments are coming up. Can Paige or Margaret? Wow, the chat is coming in very quickly. So can Paige?
Yeah. So I see the first question I see is from Elizabeth Robinson. And her question reads, the building modernization is quite lovely and impressive. I look forward to being able to visit later this year. Question, this was a building modernization. Is there or will there be an effort to address the actual library collection, beefing it up, both in general and in special collections?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the strengths and weaknesses of any collection are largely dependent on the collection's budget. But we certainly have built enough space in the new building, both that are accessible to the public as well as below grade, to have a great expansion, especially of our special collections. So we will be definitely investing in that. The city has been generous. They've given us maybe $1.5 million over the past few years for opening day collections for MLK, but it's a never-ending request for us. And as you all know, we have so many more types of collections that we need to support, including electronic collections, and it's always a struggle. But the building can support expanded collections in and everything that a central library should be in terms of supporting the needs of their communities. So the answer to that is yes.
Thank you. And I see a few people have asked if you know if Marianne's Cafe is named after someone.
That's interesting. I believe Marianne is somebody who was associated as a founder of DC Central Kitchen. I'm not positive. Of course, it's a DC Central Kitchen and Think Food Group are, they've got a leasing arrangement with the library here, so it is their space. We've agreed to the Marianne's name. I believe she's associated with DC Central Kitchen, but I actually don't know. I will find out.
I see, so we have a few more questions here. Here's one from Leah Richardson. She asks, can you say more about how you worked with communities on the design and concepts and priorities for spaces?
Yeah, so we kicked off design in March of 2014, and we probably spent the next 12 months having, I think literally it was about 60 community meetings. Some of them were plenary, meaning like come one, come all. But it was also very important for us to have very intimate meetings. And I've made it a point for myself to be involved in just about every single one of these. So it was important for us to get out to every single ward of the city, because we know that not everyone has immediate access to the MLK library. It was important for us to do focus groups. So, reaching out to specific types of populations, whether there were teens, whether they were residents experiencing homelessness. So much of this information was aggregated, and that really was the foundation to how we began laying out the program, along with the approach that I shared earlier, meaning like we want the building to get quieter as we move up. We want the building to get more active as you go from west to east. But in terms of the amount of space allocated for various things, that was largely done through that collaborative design process and all the community engagement. And things, again, like the reading room, the need for an auditorium, the need to really honor MLK in the program, all those things came much more from the community than I would say came from me or my staff or our architects.
That's great. And just kind of speaking more about kind of the outreach you did to the community, Jenny Lobby has a question here about what sort of programs related to outreach to the homeless is the library planning on doing?
Boy, that's a whole conversation in and of itself. But you know, we have back in 2014 we hired a social worker who is phenomenal, and now she is overseeing a program that we stole from Denver, the Peer Navigator program, where we are employing residents with lived experience of homelessness to be very intentional and focused, working with homeless residents. So, you know, there are some programs that you may have heard of, like Coffee and Conversation, but now we're doing much more in the way of almost like intake work, helping homeless residents know where they can get access, not just to information, but to direct services. And that is a program that we are looking to expand upon the reopening of the library. There's many. I think this idea of how do you program a building for inclusion is something that is worthy of a whole talk, frankly.
And just uplifting, Brittany, just in kind of response to what you just said, which method of community outreach do you think was the most helpful for getting the best redesign suggestions?
You know, I think that you get a lot of bang for your buck when you do these initial large group gatherings. So we had like meet the architect sessions when we unveiled the initial winner of the design competition, and there was a lot of interest early on. And you know, it's interesting. Once I think residents have some faith and trust that we know what we're doing, some of the participation begins to drop off. So early on, we had, you know, 70, 80, 90, 100, 150 people coming to some of our sessions. Then those groups would get smaller and smaller. And I think that was really, after a while, people were like, okay, the library knows what it's doing. And so the meetings got more and more intimate. But I thought that we gathered a lot of information really early on in the community engagement process.
Okay, looking at the time, maybe we can address one final question.
Let's see. So I think maybe we can go, Philip Wong asked, on the subject of community and civic engagement, is the library open probably in the future to hosting controlled demonstrations or protests?
Probably not, only because, you know, we are, as a government agency, you know, we're not going to take any official, you know, we can't host political activity per se. You know, we can certainly do programs on how to protest. You know, we've done programs with kids. In fact, some of the programming, some of the product that you saw in terms of those protest buttons, we can do sort of generic programs on protest, on finding your voice, finding your power, knowing how to engage with city government, but hosting demonstrations themselves probably goes beyond what we would even be allowed to do, I would think.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the inspiring presentation. And I think you know, your presentation gave us a lot to think about in terms of how we can approach in terms of designing a lot of things that libraries do.